Hey everybody, it's Mike Schumann of the Daily Hoosier here for another episode of East 17th Street. I am joined by Seth Tao. And Seth, back in October, uh, IU football was ranked, and Indiana was one of the few schools in the country that could claim a ranked football team, men's basketball team, and women's basketball team. People were feeling pretty good about things, and there's no joy in Bloomington unless there's good basketball. And things have gotten a little sideways for both the men's and women's program. The IU men at the midpoint of the Big Ten season are 14-7 and 5-5 in the conference. The IU women similarly 13-7, 5-4 in the conference. And so I thought it'd be a good time to kind of get together and kind of do a health check on both programs since we're at the midway of both seasons. The women play an 18-game schedule, the men 20. And we got to start with the IU men. What I called Sunday afternoon, kind of one of the worst beats in a long time. At home against Maryland, 79-78 was your final score. And I want to, I know it's been discussed a lot, but we haven't discussed it on this platform. Just the final minute of that game was pretty dramatic, and I think it was pretty telling in a lot of respects. Um, Indiana was up by 4 with, I think it was 38 seconds to go. Anthony Leal got an and one. They'd kind of already right before then started to kind of give it away a little bit, but that and one by Leal kind of seemed like the moment's like, okay, they got a fortunate bounce there with a block shot going right into his hands, and he got the and one, and they went back up by 4. Maryland quickly responds with a 2, and that's when things kind of got weird, because Maryland scored with 28 seconds left, so they were right at the spot where they pretty much had to foul, or Indiana could have run out the clock. And so I guess that's where I want to kind of start the conversation, because at that point in time, I believe the 5 on the floor for Indiana were Miles Rice, Trey Galloway, Umar Ballo, Leal, and Malik Renew. And with Maryland in a clear foul situation at that point in time, and what I would call 4 out of 5 guys that you really don't want at the free throw line, should Indiana have called a timeout right there, they had one to go to get the right people on the floor to make sure that when they went to the line, that they had the right guys at the free throw line. Because if you watch that film at that moment, Maryland was very aware that Miles Rice was the guy they didn't want to foul. They put 2 guys kind of right on him before he could get across half court, and kind of just forced him to give it up. So I think that's a tough spot. You don't want to just burn your last time out for something like that. But what's your reaction to that specific scenario when you're about ready to go to the free throw line?
I mean, I think there's a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't
Yeah.
there. Like, I think there's a lot of scenarios where Mike Woodson uses a timeout there to swap personnel, and then it ends up burning him that he doesn't have the timeout, or the personnel change that he makes burns him in another sense when, maybe he gets like Luke Goody in there, but he has to take somebody else off that he would want on the defensive end,
Right.
or, whatever it may be. Like, I think that might be getting a little bit too into the rabbit hole of what if isms. I think the reasonable thing to say is you should that many critical players to Indiana shouldn't be this bad at free throw shooting to where the other team
Right.
knows it and is comfortable putting these guys on the line. That speaks more to the team's free throw shooting ability. But I mean, yeah, you could make the case there, but everything, it turns into a domino effect if you do that.
Sure.
And then, maybe you don't even have, there's no guarantees. So I don't know. There's a case to do it. There's a case not to do it. I don't think in the grand scheme of everything that happened down the stretch, I don't really have much. I don't really have an issue with Mike Woodson not taking time out there. I mean, I think you could make the case that he could have, but I think there were a lot bigger things that went wrong down the stretch of this game.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, and we'll get to some of those. I think that's one of those kind of like with the benefit of hindsight, it's a reasonable question, but I
Right.
agree. It's not clear. But of course, Trey Galloway does get fouled. He does miss the front end of a one-on-one. So Maryland goes back the other way, down two. And I think, something else, that happens that I would categorize as borderline unforgivable. Indiana gives up an open three. I think it's fair to call it an open three. They got schemed into an open three. And they did it at a point where they had a foul to give. Both Mike Woodson and Anthony Galil said that was discussed before the play. And, the hottest shooter in the game, Rice for Maryland, makes what I believe was his fifth three of the game. It's just like, how can that happen, Seth? Like, how can you be up to not give the timeout and let the hottest shooter on the court get a pretty darn good look from three?
Yeah, and let's be clear here. They had the foul to give, but that may not have changed. That would have forced Maryland to inbound the ball, but
Sure.
that might not have changed anything. That would have
Right.
gotten them. Yes, you should give the foul when you have the foul to give, but with the way this team has been defending the three ball, it may not have mattered, and
Right.
that's kind of the crux of it. Like, yeah, you say, they got schemed into giving up this open three, but that's happening quite a bit lately. It's not like
Yeah.
this is, it. Yes, you can pinpoint that one 3-pointer that they got schemed into giving up an open three, but how about, they gave up what, like, was it 10, 11 total, 12 threes, something like that this game? Like, what about the previous 10, 11, 9 3-pointers? And a lot of those were wide open looks that they just lost their man on these. And this is becoming a serious, serious problem with this team, is just the inability to stay with their man beyond the 3-point line, over helping, creating open shooters, and just defensive breakdowns and lack of communication. We're at the end of January, and communication is still a big problem with this team. And that, to me, is, I think, the most damning thing you can say about a college basketball team is, yes, you have a lot of new pieces. Yes, you were missing Malik Renew for however many games it was that he was out, and he's still not 100% sure. But how is communication still a big problem with this team? And that's, when you look at the end game sequence and you give up an open three, it can't be that surprising, because this is what this team has been doing. They've given up double-digit threes in 4 of the last 5 games now.
Yeah, and I want to we'll kind of step back to the big picture and what it all means, but you're right to point it out, because it's interrelated. Like, you have all these data points that happen, you know, in games that point to a bigger issue, and I think that's kind of where we're at right now. So Maryland makes that three, and so IU suddenly goes from up 4 with 38 seconds to down 1 with around 7 seconds. They start out with a sidelines out of bounds play that quickly results in a baseline out of bounds, because Malik Renew loses it, or it's tapped out of his hands out of bounds under the basket. And that's where things really got crazy. And it's created all kinds of viral moments around the IU fan base and social media and everything else. So I think it was 3.9 seconds to go. Trey Galloway inbounding under the basket. And it looked like they had drawn up a play. Everybody knew what the play was. And all of a sudden, 2 substitutions come in off the bench. Luke Goody and Mackenzie Mbako for Ballo and Leal. I got to start with just the concept. With 3.9 seconds left, baseline out of bounds, taking Umar Bala out of the game. That kind of blew my mind. I don't know if you would agree with that. It's like, basically 4 seconds is enough time to get up a shot and get in a putback, or just have him as be your kind of emergency, just lob it in and get some kind of close attempt at the basket. So I couldn't believe that they were taking Ballo out of the game. I get the concept of Mbako and Goody, just because they're tall, they're good shooters, they can get a shot off from just about anywhere. But Ballo, in my opinion, couldn't be a guy you could take out in that situation. What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, I don't remember exactly who it was, but I don't think I've ever seen a scene in Assembly Hall when those subs were happening, where it felt like the fans were like weighing in on the substitutions as they were happening. Like I don't
Yes.
remember who, somebody almost went to the bench instead of Balo. I don't remember who it was, but
Right.
then like they came back out onto the floor, and then Balo went to the bench, and like they were kind of cheering when whoever was it Galloway, or I don't remember who was about to come out, but they were cheering when that player was about to come out, and then when they came back over and Balo went to the bench, everybody was like, "Oh, whoa!"
When you do like a ti thing with a fan at timeout and they're blindfolded and they're trying to find something and the crowd's like, "No, no, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah."
yeah,
That's what it
yeah,
felt like.
yeah, yeah. You're right.
Uh, and I
but
won't complete the analogy with who would be blindfolded in this point, but
but yes, I do agree with you that I mean, I couldn't believe that you're taking Ball out in that situation. You're down by 1 point. A layup wins
right,
the game.
right.
Why? I mean, yes, Maryland's got size, and it's not necessarily like Ballo going up against Miami of Ohio, where he's just got a giant size advantage on everybody, and he's just going to be able to bully his way to a game-winning bucket. But like, why are you taking your tallest player out when a layup wins the game? Whether that means you're scheming something to get a quick post touch for him and just a quick layup look, whether it's that, whether it's when you have 3-4 seconds left, that's enough. That is enough time for an offensive rebound and putback. That's enough
Yeah.
time for a tip in. You could run some play that gets him an easy lob. Like, why are you taking him off? Yeah, that made no sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, even the shot that they ended up with, I think it was Trey Galloway ended up right there under the basket. Somebody 7 foot tall probably could have tipped it in.
Yeah,
But let's talk about the shot that they did get, because that's we've kind of built it up to a lot of questionable things, but this was the most questionable. I've watched this over and over. So they get the subs in, and what's clear as day is Mackenzie Mbako comes into the game, and they're kind of in a stacked format with all the players lined up directly in front of the Galloway who was inbounding, and you see Mbako go like this, basically saying, "I don't know the play," which is reasonable because I think the play had been called. Then he got put in, and he doesn't know the play. And there's also some kind of disconnect between Miles Rice and Malik Reneau, because Rice gets the ball in the corner. I'm not sure if he's supposed to get the ball there because Malik Reneau is trying to set a screen. I don't know if that was a screen after he caught it or a screen to set up his catch, like on a flare out or something like that. But you watch after the buzzer sounds, Reneau goes up to Rice and he's gesturing like aggressively, like you're supposed to. What I'm reading is take that screen. I don't know when he was supposed to take it, either after the catch or before the catch, but clearly there was a disconnect there. So it's indisputable that the players didn't know what they were supposed to do. Maybe just two of them, maybe all of them. I don't know, but it's beyond doubt that they did not know what to do. And um, that all happened right in front of the IU bench. So it's almost inexcusable.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. I think it was Tony from Assembly Call went through some footage and
Mhm.
pieced together what he thought the play was supposed to be, and that what that looked like in some earlier games from this season. And what it looked like on those clips was, and the play worked, and I think it would have been a reasonable play to run here had they done what they were supposed to do. Renew was going to set the screen, and Rice would have come around and gotten the ball pretty much for like a catch and shoot around the elbow.
Right.
And you can question whether a mid-range shot in that point is really what you want to be going for in that scenario, because that's not the highest percentage look you can get. But
Sure.
if that's a play that you're confident you can get an open look at, then I don't have a problem with that play call. And so for everybody that wants to hammer the play call, I
Yeah.
don't think there's an issue with the play call, because it's something they've run before clearly several times with success. And so, I don't have an issue with the play call itself. But, I think Woodson was talking about this on his radio show last night and said, I called, there was no confusion. I called the play and they didn't execute. And it's like, you know, these aren't mutually exclusive. But like yes, you called a play that works and they didn't execute, but you also created confusion by these late subs, and clearly that impacted things where not everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing, and that clearly threw the play off of it. And you sure, maybe you could point the finger at Trey Galloway too, for indowning the ball the way, to Rice in the corner, because when you throw it into Rice in the corner, what are you going to do?
Right.
Granted, I don't remember, how long he stood there with the ball, and you obviously cannot take a 5-second call there, but,
Right.
but, I don't fault Mike Woodson for the play call, but I mean, just the chaos of the late substitutions and everything, like, clearly impacted that play. But it's also, fair to say Miles Rice blew that play up by not running around the screen like he was supposed to. And, in that sense, Malik Renew is right that,
Right.
obviously it's not a good look to be, so aggressively gesturing to your player, your teammate like that, right in front of everybody, right when, with the way the season has been going. That's obviously
Right.
not going to look good. But he is right that that was on Miles Rice.
Yeah, and we all know Malik's, a guy that doesn't keep his emotions in check very well. So that wasn't altogether surprising. Yeah, and I think from Galloway's standpoint, once Rice stopped and demanded the ball right there, Galloway really didn't have a choice, because you mentioned the 5-second count. It's like if he's going to stop and that's where the ball's supposed to go, you almost have to give it to him. So it was just a mess. And then
Throw it off the defender's legs and reset.
yeah, I would have given him
That's
a
risky.
lot of
That's obviously
credit.
risky, though.
Yeah, a lot of credit if he would have come up with that in that high pressure moment. So obviously Rice misses a desperation shot, and immediately Mike Woodson walks off the court, which just is its own viral moment. Uh, I've heard people criticize Luke Goody for kind of redirecting Woodson back to the handshake line. I think he redirected Yasir Rosamond to the assistant coach. That's really unfair. I think what Goody was seeing was a potential viral moment. Like, oh my God, my coach is going to walk off the court. He's not going to go to the handshake line. I want to make sure that he doesn't become a story in and of itself, because he just basically walked away from Kevin Willard and that whole situation. So I think he was thinking, like, I'll redirect here just to get him to at least go shake hands before he leaves. And then I've heard people say, well, it's not a player's position to do that, things like that. It's one of those things that's not a big deal at all. It's just kind of heat of the moment. But because of all the other stuff we've talked about in the last minute and the direction of the season, direction of the program, it's just like one more thing that's like, oh my God, here we go.
Yeah, I think it's weird to criticize Luke Goody for anything that happened with that. Honestly, I mean, what did he do wrong there? and to be fair, like, I don't think he's thinking as deeply as you were kind of making it seem. Like, oh, I'm worried he's going to become a viral. I think he just saw his coach forget about the post game handshake line where he was himself walking, and was like, "Hey, coach, look, come on, we got to shake hands." And I feel like that's probably all there was to it. Nothing more, As for Woodson, I'm sure it was just a heat of the moment thing. And, maybe there probably is less excuse for Yasir Rosemond, who needed to be turned around also. At least Woodson can, this is Woodson's fourth year in college basketball, but, at least he could maybe make the excuse of, I'm used to the NBA. We don't really do that in the NBA, yada, yada. But obviously, it's year 4, for him at IU. Like, you can't really use that excuse anymore. But, it's heat of the moment, and in the grand scheme, it's not that big of a deal. But when your season is circling the drain the way Indiana's is, everything becomes magnified.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue to kind of step back to the big picture. You started talking a little bit about the defense on this team. It's clearly, in my opinion, what is sinking the season right now. They in their 7 losses this year, they've given up at least 79 points in all 7. In their last 4 games, their last 4 losses, they've given up 82 or more. They're averaging 82.5 per game in those losses. 3-point defense in their last four losses. Teams are shooting 42% from three. In the last two games, it was 49%. So, I think it was a legit concern when the schedule got a little bit more difficult that, this defense, based on what we saw in the Bahamas and elsewhere, was potentially going to be a problem for this team. And we're seeing it. And what's really concerning about it is they haven't even played the best offenses they're going to play this year. The next four games are for the best five Ken Palm most efficient offenses in the Big Ten. So we haven't even seen the beginning of it. So I guess you started to point out some of the things you're seeing with the defense. What are your main concerns with them right now on the defensive end of the floor?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it's the communication to me that's the biggest issue. I mean, the overhelping, I think, like I'd said, has been, I think, a frustrating staple is the best way to put it of Indiana's defense. And it's not just this year. I mean, this is something this team has done last year, and even during the good years with Trace Jackson Davis, those teams. I feel like they were overhelping. Maybe not in the first year when Indiana was a really good defensive team, but I
Right.
mean, you saw some of it in the 22 in TJD's final season. You saw some of that too, where they would overhelp defensively and just leave a wide open shooter. And I mean, especially when communication is an issue, I think you're more prone to that sort of thing happening where you just kind of abandon your man and you just are left kind of pointing fingers at one another. And it's, like I said, why is communication still an issue for this team? And there are bits and pieces here where they have good moments, good stretches defensively, or they uh, or maybe that or maybe they have moments, stretches here where 3-point defense isn't the biggest issue, like some games where it's teams are just beating them on straight line drives or things like that. But I mean, to me, it's just it doesn't feel like it's necessarily one consistent thing. Like
Yeah.
oh, they're not closing out hard enough, they're not getting back quick enough. Like it doesn't feel like it's one consistent thing from game to game that's leading to all the 3-point defense issues, aside from really communication. But it's clear that something is wrong with this 3-point defense because it's just it's tanking. Like you, especially with the way Indiana has its own offensive 3-point issues a lot of games. It's just, if
Right.
you're going to defend the three ball like this, you're just making it so much harder to win games.
Yeah, the trade-off is really rough if you're giving up 12 threes and making 5. And I documented yesterday in a story about their defense. It's not just the 3-point defense. Their 2-point defense is 5 percentage points worse than it was in year one under Woodson, and it has gotten progressively worse each season. And I think part of it is, you mentioned Trace Jackson Davis. He could clean up a lot of messes because he was so athletic and he could chase down a lot of drives to the rim and get blocks. And then guys like Xavier Johnson and Rob Phinisee and what I would call a healthier Trey Galloway were better on the perimeter, shutting down a lot of drives that we're seeing get into the paint this year. So I think it's everything in it. I think it goes to recruiting to some extent. Like, you have to recruit guys that fit your defensive scheme, and I'm not sure that the main core rotation that they're putting on the court right now is a good fit for what Mike Woodson wants to do with overhelping and with some of the other stuff. And also from just a game planning standpoint, I think it's interesting. Like, you almost never see anybody that Indiana's playing, like a Peyton Sanford, for example, just elite shooters. You almost never see them get like a do not leave designation. Like, you're not going to switch off of him. You're not going to, do anything in a ball screen. You stick to Peyton Sanford and let everybody else do what they have to do. And then against Northwestern, like, there was, Brooks Barnheiser, they were trying to double him when he got into the paint, like with Ballo. And it's like, why are you doubling, putting yourself in rotation, and then creating open shooters like Ty Berry or Jalen Leach? I mean, it's just questionable decisions. And, it's easy to pick apart, but again, the trend overall is what's really disturbing here. And I think it's becoming clear that this is probably going to be Woodson's worst defensive team, and you almost just wonder, like, did they overemphasize offense in the portal, and this is the byproduct. And another thing is, I wonder if Kane and Carlisle, um, you know, I think probably they thought he was going to be a guy that could help them defensively, but he's been so erratic on offense that they can't trust him to have him on the court to provide the defensive aspect. So I know I'm rambling on there, but what else are you thinking in reaction to all that?
I think kind of similarly to maybe they were banking on Carlisle being, more of a factor defensively. I would guess that they probably anticipated Mackenzie Mbako taking steps forward defensively too. Maybe not becoming, an all Big Ten defensive team type of guy, but I'm sure they pictured him in the offseason, from last year to this year, taking steps defensively, and that just has not happened. I mean, Mbako is such a liability on the defensive end. It's really problematic. Like it for a guy who came in with the one and done, or like the kind of the aura, the vibe of like a one and done type of guy. He's probably still going to be playing college basketball next year because he
Yeah,
can't defend worth a lick.
right. Yeah, and I think if your defense is, get in to get out, nail slot rim, where you're, really getting drugged down in the paint and you have to recover, you got to have quicker guys than like an Mbako at the three, and you could go up and down the whole roster. I just don't think quickness and foot speed is really their thing to match what they're trying to do, at least what it seems like they're trying to do defensively. Like I said, it looks like it's tanking their season a little bit right now, and it brings out, widening even more out to even bigger picture. It's such a fascinating time to cover this team, because you got, a team that right now is clearly on the NCAA bubble. There's a clear path to make the tournament, but as I wrote a couple of days ago, I'm kind of embarrassed doing a weekly bracketology thing, because most people would say, what the hell are you doing that for? They're not going to make the tournament. And the other end of that spectrum is, there's three teams that aren't going to make the Big Ten tournament. I think they're in that conversation probably as much as they are the NCAA tournament right now, because of the next six games. I think going 0-6 over the next six is not outside the realm of what's possible. And if you do that, you're 5-11 in the league. And then I think you're talking about, hey, not only because they're probably right there amongst the last 3 to 5 teams, but because at that point, what is the morale of the team? Woodson talked about morale a little bit on his radio show too. Can they recover from something like that? Do they even want to play in the Big Ten tournament? I mean, they didn't want to play in the NIT last year. So what makes you think, if things really did think, that they'd even want to play in the Big Ten tournament? So many things, not to mention the fact that there's clearly at this point a legitimate discussion about the, long-term legitimacy of the Mike Woodson era itself. So we got all these threads going on. And you tell me, I don't even know what's the right one to even be talking about right now.
I mean, you just brought up a whole lot. Like, could they miss the Big Ten tournament? Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can rule anything out with this team right now. And the thing is, it's like, for all that we say, it's like they do have the talent in
Sure.
theory to kind of put a run together or win a big game. Like, I keep joking, like for how this whole season has gone, and really how the whole Mike Woodson era has gone. How fitting would it be for this to be the year that they snap the drought in Madison, Wisconsin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to react to that. I certainly have no expectations of it.
I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying, like, how fitting would that be if that happens? But there's just such a wide range of outcomes for this team. Really, I mean, if they show up and are really on their best game, I mean, but I feel like we just haven't seen that version of them in so long now. Like, when is the last time that you can say, like, if they show up and they're on their best game, like when's the last time we saw that version of this team?
I mean, I would argue the second half against Maryland. I mean, I kind of glossed over that part of that game is that, they were down whatever they were down and went on a 22-7 run in the second half. The problem with Indiana is it's so abbreviated. Like it's we're not talking about like a 3-game run. We're talking about like a 10-minute run. Even that game you went to in Philadelphia, they won that big game because of a 10-minute run. They didn't play that well the rest of the game. And that's the problem with this team is you get it in such short spurts that it can even not be enough in the game when it's your best basketball, which I think, I mean, we've talked about after the Illinois game, the negativity of the crowd. They completely flipped the crowd in that Maryland game. It was the best crowd I thought they had all season at Assembly because they were playing great basketball for, I don't know how many minutes it was, probably in the 8 to 10 range to go on that 22-7 run. But they can't even sustain it. They can't close out a game. They can't sustain it for one game to the next when they get like what was a pretty respectable road win at Ohio State. Like there's just no sustainability in this program right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're just this is just an erratic basketball team right now, both like from game to game. You don't really know what to expect. You don't really know what to expect from half to half, from timeout to timeout. It's just this team is just very erratic right now, and that's leading to the results you're seeing on the court.
If you were just a completely neutral observer, which I guess we're supposed to be, you probably are more so than I am. I guess that would be highly entertaining, just because you just never know what you're going to get. But
in a
it's
cosmic sort of way, yes.
I do want to look forward. You mentioned at Wisconsin, the next 2 games at Purdue, at Wisconsin. Ken Pom says those are the 2 most unlikely wins on the remainder of their schedule. I think they've won at Purdue once in the last 12 years. They've not won, as you mentioned, at Wisconsin since 1998. Bob Knight was still the coach then. It was the first game ever at the Kohl Center, I believe, first or second. And so, there's a real chance that we're talking about losing 6 out of 7. Going into the final 8 of the Big Ten right here. I
think there's a real chance you're talking about losing 8 straight. I mean, you look at the next 6 games on the schedule: at Purdue, at Wisconsin, home against Michigan, at Michigan State, home against UCLA, and home against Purdue. And it's like, it's hard to, while it's hard to think about, they're going to lose 8 straight games. Like, I don't feel comfortable pegging any of those as wins.
Yeah, Kim Pom says UCLA is the going to be the closest. They're still expecting a 1-point loss, but I think they've won 4 in a row and seem to have kind of turned things around here a little bit, maybe against a little bit lighter schedule themselves. But yeah, I mean, I will. I think I already said this. I won't be shocked if they go 0-6 over these next 6 games, and I just don't know where that leaves you as a program with all those other variables that I laid out. I guess it merits mentioning here, if they do lose these next 2, which I think everybody expects that they will, you got a really, really interesting dynamic on February 8th. You got Michigan coming in. I think everybody knows who the head coach of Michigan is, and where some sentiments are as it relates to him. I hate to say it, but can you allow that scene to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I know it would put Scott Dolson in a tricky spot, and I don't really know the right answer to it. I mean, maybe it's something, and it's all speculation. I don't want to, act like I know for sure what would be happening, but would they maybe come out and announce, and maybe not just completely pull the trigger and fire anybody mid-season, but would you come out and announce, this is Woodson's final season with the program, and just kind of, maybe try to let the fans give him his flowers, as an IU legend, and kind of maybe take the heat down a little bit.
Yeah.
But, maybe something like that. Maybe you just kind of let it happen and hope for the best. Maybe you go scorched earth here. I mean, I think if the stretch where if you're really gonna, I think if they were going to pull the trigger at all on a coaching move before the end of the season, it's not before that game. I think they have a long gap in between the UCLA game and the Purdue game.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, the UCLA game is on Valentine's Day, and the Purdue game is not until February 23rd. So that's what, 7, 8, 9. That's like 10 days between games there, which is rare to have that long of a gap between games in February. And I think that would be, to me, the sensible time to make, any kind of move where you have that long of a break in between games. But, you're right that Michigan game could get, if they drop these next two games, that there's going to be a lot of fans. It's not just going to be fans chanting "Fire Woodson." It would be fans chanting "Hire Dusty."
Yeah, yeah, I would be stunned if that chant didn't happen. And when they
And that
introduced,
chant could still happen even if they come out and announce something that it's Woodson's final year.
yeah,
Fans would still be chanting "Hire Dusty," I'm sure. But
right. At least the optics of that chant feel a little bit different when you know
mhm.
that, okay, well, they're in coach search mode. So yeah, it makes sense to say who you want to hire, but to have it in the face of a current coach would be pretty rough. So I guess taking a further step back, you got Purdue on Friday. To me, watching them play this year, you have to slow down Braden Smith. He's kind of the guy that just does everything. I couldn't be more impressed every time I watch him. Just his ability to get downhill. And I first watched Braden when he was a freshman in high school, and at that point, I think it was at the Pacers Athletic Center in Westfield, standing next to Todd Leary, and both of us were like, "Oh my God, I've never seen a freshman in high school have court vision like this kid has," and it's translated all the way to what I would say is probably first team All-American consideration this year with the way he's been playing. I think you have to find a way to slow him down. They have lost 5 games this year, and when they've lost, he's not shot particularly well. He's had turnovers. You almost have to get the ball out of his hands. Just overweight your attention towards him and make somebody else on that team beat you. Is what I'm seeing. What's your reaction to Purdue this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, Braden Smith is definitely the key. I mean, for all the people that came in to this year saying, now he doesn't have Zach Edey, he's going to struggle. And I mean, look what he's
Yeah.
doing. He's still like top 3, top 4 in the nation in assists per game. I mean, he's having an outstanding season. The one thing that sticks out to me when I look at Purdue, the Purdue's team stats against Indiana's team stats is you're going to be shocked by what I say here, that it's Indiana needs to really, really lock in on the 3-point defense, because Purdue as a team on the season shoots 38.4% from 3-point range. That's 19th in the country. That's the 19th best 3-point percentage in the country. And while Indiana, their 3-point defense overall on the season is not, I don't think that stat's going to be really reflective of the way they've been defending the 3 ball the last month, the last 2 weeks, whatever you want to call it, because what they did in the cupcake games against Eastern Illinois, in the Eastern Illinois of the world, is not reflective of how they played against Maryland or Northwestern. And with the way this team is leaking open threes, I mean, if you're going to give a team that shoots 38%, over 38% from beyond the arc, that enough open looks, you're going to lose.
Yeah, that's why I think it's such a bad matchup for Indiana. Because if you look at who Purdue lost to, Marquette, Texas A&M, Auburn, those are all teams in Penn State. Even those are teams that don't let you run your offense. They try to disrupt you. They try to create turnovers. They get in passing lanes. Indiana's not like that at all. They try to scheme against you. They try to switch. They try to stay in front of the ball, but there's no like disruptive aspect of their defense at all. They're pretty low nationally in forced turnover percentage, and so I think it's a really bad matchup for Indiana, because if you allow Purdue to run their offense, they're gonna find a way to beat you in 30 seconds, and Indiana's just not been a team that's been able to, as we've said exhaustively here, slow anybody down like that. So we'll see how it all plays out. Obviously not painting a real bright picture for the men, but as we pivot to the women, I feel a little bit more optimistic about outlook for March for them. As I mentioned, 13-7 overall, 5-4 in the Big Ten. Torvik rates them as the 38th team in nationally. I didn't look at the net. I don't know if you know where they are in the
I can
net.
pull it up.
I assume it's similar. But they're a team that's, well documented, had their share of struggles this year as well. Some real head scratchers early in the year, like the loss at Butler and home loss to Harvard stands out. But they've also been a team that's really pulled off some surprises. Beat Stanford, beat Baylor. One at Iowa was probably the biggest surprise of it all. So this is a team that's capable, and I think it highlights that they're well coached, and maybe just not nearly as talented as what Terry Moran has had in the past. But what's your big picture assessment of kind of where they stand right now, and kind of the outlook for making the NCAA tournament as a starting point?
Yeah. Well, look, let's give some context here to some of those big wins that you were just talking about. Because when you look at ESPN has their women's bracketology, and they right now have Indiana as one of the last 4 buys. So they have Indiana as a 9 seed in the tournament. But the big wins you just talked about, Iowa on the road is definitely a big win, but Iowa right now is on the bubble themselves.
Yeah,
Iowa is, one of the last 4 in. So they have Iowa rated below Indiana in there. Stanford is not in the bracket at all right now. Stanford is not even a tournament team, per ESPN right now. And Baylor is a 7 seed. And so that's kind of how you have to think about it, is their best win right now is over a 7 seed in the tournament. And the Big Ten on the women's side is really tough. And I mean, it's tough on the men's side too, but it's tough on the women's side. And Indiana had chances against some really good teams. I mean, they were winning against a really good USC team in the 4th quarter, and they just couldn't put the game away. And they were hanging right. They had one really bad quarter against UCLA, and the rest of that game, they were neck and neck with UCLA, the number 1 team in the country, UCLA. And so obviously if you had won one of those games, your season looks completely different right now. But it's hard to talk about that with, the way they've just been playing. I mean, they just on Monday night, they won at Washington, and that was coming off a 3-game losing streak where it was, they've lost to Illinois, and Illinois is a solid, not good, not great team. Illinois is a 10 seed in women's bracketology, number 28 on Torvik. But Illinois is just a team that's given Indiana matchup problems for several years now, pretty much
right.
since Shauna Green took over. It's just Illinois is a really quick team, and Indiana doesn't have the speed to keep up with them, really. And then they lost to USC, and then they lost a really bad game at Oregon. That was the worst basketball game I've watched all season, men or women. We could go on and on about how bad that game was, but
I would concur.
And I mean, and on top of just both teams playing really poorly for most of the game, like Indiana blew a 10-point lead too in that game, and so they turn around and win at Washington coming off that. But even there, like, that game almost got away from them. And I had been messaging one of the other writers. It's like, if they blow this game,
Yeah,
that would have been a terrible, because they had Yarden Garzon, the team's leading scorer, had a career high 35 points that night. Career high, I think, 8 3-pointers. Like, she was absolutely smoking hot on fire. Like, could not be stopped that game. And if you blow the game when that happens, there's just little redeeming to you can go, that would just be so soul crushing for a program to lose a game like that. But they put the game away, in the dying moments when they needed to. So, here they are. They'll have plenty of opportunities to continue racking up, resume building wins, but they're firmly on the, and yes, like you say, I think I would be more optimistic about the women's team than the men's team right now. But I mean, I think this is a women's basketball team that is not at the same level as they were the last few years, almost certainly. I mean, I think so you have to minimize your expectations here, I think, for Indiana women right now. If this is not a team that's going to be hosting NCAA tournament games in Bloomington, absolutely not. And I think so. You're already looking at a team that if they get into the tournament, they're going to be going on the road and maybe needing to beat, if they win a tournament game, they will probably need to beat a higher seeded home team there. So, at that point, it's the odds would be against Indiana as far as, making the Sweet 16 again. You never know, but I think this team's ceiling is lower than the ones they had the last few years. I think there's talent here, but this team just seems to lack an alpha like they had the last few years. They don't have a Mackenzie Holmes type that you can just, if all else fails, you can dump it down to her and say, go make something happen. And most of the time she will. You don't have a Grace Berger who can just kind of make something happen out of nowhere. And there's definite flaws with this team. And, if they don't, Terry Morin is a good coach, overall. There's certainly flaws with her team and flaws with her coaching, and she's not perfect, but she's a good coach who I think generally puts them in position to win games, and I think they'll have a chance. I mean, Torvik right now is projecting their record to finish 18-11, 10-8 in Big Ten, projecting them to, but I mean, the Nebraska game coming up on Sunday is a big game because that's the one game, that's a resume game that's probably winnable for Indiana, like at home against Nebraska. That's a potentially winnable game. I think it's going to be a lot harder to go win at Michigan. I think, win, beating Ohio State, even at home, I think is a big ask. Winning at Michigan State, could be tough. Winning at home against a good Maryland team could be tough, but the Indiana women could pull out some of those games, though. I comparatively to the men's team, I have very little hope for the men's team pulling out one of those next 6 games, like we talked about. I think it's not unreasonable to think, maybe Indiana women could pull out one of those tough games.
Yeah, you mentioned they were competitive with UCLA and USC, and I got to give you credit. I think the record of this podcast will show. I think I asked you before the season who was the favorite to win the Big Ten, and you said the California teams, and that was pretty much spot on. And I think I've watched UCLA a few times. I think they're a legit national championship caliber team. I don't see any flaws in that team, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. It's kind of a new brand potentially, getting a national title and bringing a national title to the Big Ten potentially. But yeah, as I look at their schedule, I agree that Nebraska game is one of the few that you look at and say, okay, it's projected at least to be a real toss-up. So that would be one that would be really important to get. Maryland would be a really nice win because I think it would be a resume boost. It's going to be tough, obviously, but they've had some success there lately. I mean, do you see like a path for this team to kind of turn a corner and begin a little bit higher level play as people have grown accustomed to, or is it just a function of what the talent's not there, the closers aren't there with Berger and Holmes, and it's probably going to be a bumpy road the rest of the way, kind of what we've seen to this point?
I think I lean more towards the latter because while there is talent there, I think there's been some players who have been disappointing this season, and I don't really mind naming players who have been disappointing. I think Lily Meister got benched for Caroline Strickland, and she's looking completely lost on the court right now, and I'm sure a lot of that is mental. And how can you blame somebody for being a little lost after you get benched? But I think even when she's out there and hadn't been struggling, I think her ceiling as a player may be more limited than people hoped, even with the development. I think and it was never reasonable to expect her to come in and be Mackenzie Holmes. I mean, right. That was just unreasonable. But I think her ceiling as Caroline Strickland has just flat out outplayed her this season. I think Meister's conditioning is often rough. I think when she was starting out games, she was looking pretty gassed within like the first 2-3 minutes of the game to where she would already need a blow. And that's just not something that, Terry Morin typically likes to keep a pretty thin rotation, 7 with a thin 8, and
Right.
to have a starter that gets gassed that quickly just isn't really going to work for her. And Indiana, I think statistically has been a team that's kind of played at a slower pace, but I think Terry likes to play at a higher, a faster tempo if possible. So I think just not all of the talent has really been there. I think Sydney Parrish is battling really, I give Sydney Parrish a ton of credit because she's battling hard out there and giving everything she has. But I think she's probably limited physically right now.
Yeah.
She looks a step slower than she was when she was healthy. And, she's pushing through it with the brace. And, Terry actually talked about her wearing the brace after the Washington game. And it's seemingly more of just kind of a comfort thing for her, with her knee. It's not necessarily a medical necessity anymore. But clearly if you watch the game, she doesn't seem to have the same burst of quickness that she had in the past. I think Shea Chesky has been in a really tough stretch right now where she's just not been a steady contributor the way that everybody hoped. And, I think she's already limited. I think she's already limited defensively by her size. In that USC game, she got matched up. I think it was a few times on switches, to be fair, but I think there were a few times that she got matched up against Juju Watkins, and I'm like, Juju Watkins is going to score every time against Shea Chesky, and
Yeah.
just because of the size difference. Shay's 5'7", but offensively, I think she's struggled to get involved in games as Indiana was hoping this season, and because of that, I think you're now, and Sydney Parrish had a really good game against Washington. But I think just with her limitations, I think you've seen a much more inconsistent. I feel like Chloe Moore McNeil has taken a bit of a step back this year, to be honest. I think her scoring is not as potent as it was last year by any means. I think some of her decision, and I don't know whether it's that she feels like she's got more weight on her shoulders or what it is necessarily with Chloe, but it feels like she's more mistake prone than really she has been maybe in her whole career. I think she's just not give it. And I think because of, all of that, I think then you're left with probably an unreasonable amount of scoring burden on Yarden Garzon, who's a really good player, a really good scorer. But again, she's not perfect. She's got limited skill set. I think she didn't play at all in the fourth quarter against Illinois because she's not quick enough. And she became a liability on the defensive end because of that. And she was barely getting involved offensively. And so I think, and that's been your top scorer, your top scoring option, on this team. And so I think basically, the TLDR is that you're looking at a team that has a lot of limitations, but plenty of talent, but a lot of limitations as to how far they, realistically can go this season.
And kind of broadening out on that program, we talked about maybe, I don't know if replacing Holmes and Berger is the right word because I don't know that you really replace players like that. But, recruiting to me with them has been, a little bit suspect. I don't think they've, in the transfer portal era and even in the high school ranks, it doesn't seem to me like they've made much of a splash. And so you've seen the regression that's naturally come as a result of that. Like, this is probably a tough one to answer, but like, what do you think that they need to do as a program to get better results recruiting? Is it, change what the types of players that they're focused on, or where are the holes there?
I'm not sure that there is an easy answer to that question. I think their whole recruiting strategy to me feels it's interesting. I feel like Terry Morin does it. It's not like they're out there splashing offers to a ton of kids. It doesn't feel. It feels like more they kind of. It's not that they don't do their homework or whatever, but like it feels like they kind of target, very aggressively target like a few specific kids, and perhaps then they could be pointing to a solid hit rate, as far as, these are the number of kids we've offered, these are the number of those kids that have committed. Like, they probably do have because of, not offering a high number of kids, they probably do have a pretty good hit rate in terms of, offers to commitments. But I mean, clearly, I think it felt like for a couple of years with the wave that they brought in with Garzone and then Lamondola the next. And to be clear, I think that duo of Lamondola and Lene Beaumont, I still think those are two very talented players, and they're missing Lene Beaumont this season.
Yeah.
Like I think a healthy Lene Beaumont, I think, would be making a big difference for this team right now. And I think those two are, her and Lamondola both can be impact players in the future. But I remember when they brought in Lamondola, kind of feeling like it felt like they were targeting that sort of player, like with her and Garzone, like these like taller, and you could lump Paris into that too,
Right.
especially with more of the way she's played this season. It's felt like she's played a little more as a forward this season than a wing. Not that she's not playing on the wing, but it just these kind of taller kind of combo guard forwards, like
Right.
these players that in theory could run a point forward for you,
Right.
like those types of players, and just kind of maybe trying to create size advantages that way. And I think I don't know for sure if that was kind of intentional or if it was just, they saw good players that happened to fit that mold and that's the direction they went. But I think you're seeing it now, particularly now that they don't have the quickness they need,
Right.
to keep up with these teams. And that's been their difficulty. That was a big reason why they lost that game against Miami when they were the number one seed. Was Miami was just much quicker than them, took it to Indiana, and they, when they got punched in the mouth, they just could never recover there. And they just couldn't really keep up pace wise, speed wise. And yeah, I mean, maybe that is a recruiting thing, and I think the stars recruiting wise only matter to a certain extent, obviously, because if you're continuously getting the results in the games that matter, then, who cares? Kind of like Kurt Signetti says, at that point, who cares? But it's fair to say that they haven't really broken through the way they would want to, in terms of recruiting. They got they got the back-to-back 5-stars in Graceberger and Mackenzie Holmes, and they just haven't really brought in that caliber of player from the high school ranks. They
Right.
haven't really brought, because Sydney Parrish was at that level coming out of high school, but obviously she went to Oregon. I mean, I think Indiana wanted her, but she went to Oregon over Indiana at that point, and then everything worked out the way it did. So I think you're looking at, and this is a program that hasn't been afraid of using the portal.
Right.
Certainly not to the extent that the men's team did this year, but
Right.
this is a program that hasn't been afraid of using the portal. I think, I'm not saying they need to start going out there and pumping out a lot more offers and changing the way they strategize in that, but yeah, they probably do need to be targeting more speed out of the high school rank, like players that can, speedier guards, speedier players in general to help you keep up with the Illinois. And look, I keep mentioning Illinois just because that's, the clear one team that causes them issues with that, but it's not the only game where that's been an issue by any means. And so to keep up with teams like Illinois, I think you do need to be targeting more speed.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason for them. I mean, if a year like this is the floor in the Terry Morin area, and we're talking about still making an NCAA tournament, maybe you're one and done in the tournament, but it's this is kind of the floor. Then I think it's fair to say they've been on a great run, and if that's the worst of it, then it continues to be a great story. But I think this offseason is going to be critical because I think that they are going to have to, they're going to lose some key pieces. They're going to have to really upgrade the roster somehow. And it's, I don't think you can count on freshmen to do it. I know they've got a couple quality freshmen coming in, and is it Navia Coffee and
Mm-hmm.
Maya Makaluski?
Yeah.
Good players, but I don't know how much you can expect from year one. So transfer portal looks like it's going to be an important part of what they do during the offseason. So I think it'll be really interesting how they go about that, and if they do some of
Yeah.
the things that you're mentioning here.
I think they have to go into the portal, particularly in the
Yeah.
backcourt, because when you're losing Chloe Moore McNeil and Sydney Parrish, I mean, Parrish is more of a wing forward than a guard, but I mean, particularly with Chloe, I mean, you'll have Shea Chesky back next year,
Right.
and presumably you'll have Alexis Bargesser back, and she's but she's been much better. I think offensively, her shot looks a heck of a lot better this year than it
Yeah.
did last year and before that. But I mean, she's still more of a defensive first type of player, not a player who's going to lead you in scoring or kind of put up these like 20-point games that you see, or she's certainly not going to put up like 35 like Yarden Garzone did.
Right.
Yeah, but I think they probably do need to go into the back, get more of a scoring punch from somewhere in the backcourt, unless they see those two freshmen and are very confident that they'll be able to get that from one of those kids. But even so, I feel like they're going to want some more experience in the backcourt. The front court, I mean, you'll lose Caroline Striplin, but I mean, Lily Meister is going to have to take steps forward for them this offseason, and
Right.
you'll have Faith Wiseman and Sydney Fenn after redshirting as options behind her, and I guess Curry Jelks too, Sharnice Curry Jelks too, if she's kind of ready to break out. But I mean, yeah, this is a team. You're right. This is going to be a critical offseason because Garzone will be back next year, and that will be huge. When you're losing, they're losing enough to where I think it's going to be a critical offseason, and there's reasonable concern going forward if they don't plug enough holes. But I mean, I don't think it's not like Terry Morin didn't address needs in the transfer portal this offseason. They just, they had a lot to make up for. And I think it's not unfair to say that they just needed, maybe they weren't fully aware of everything that they needed to make up. And maybe, and kind of like we talked about with the IU men, how, just Carlisle didn't turn out the defender they wanted to be, and Baco didn't take the steps forward. Clearly, there were players who didn't take the steps forward this offseason that they were hoping for. And some of that is going to need to happen too in terms of player development going into next year.
Yep, for sure. Anything else you want to cover with the women's program, or should we wrap it up?
I think I've rambled long enough.
Okay. Well, we thank everybody for listening all the way through. He is Seth Tao. I am Mike Schumann for East 17th Street. We'll catch you all next time.